You made us work, I made us worse. We fell apart 1,000 times, 1,000 times. You moved away, I'm here to stay. I wish I could go back in time, back in time. I'm so sorry that I hurt you so deep. Swear I spent the last few years just trying to change. I'm on my knees and I'm begging you, please. Is there any chance you're thinking about me? If I change my ways, babe, won't you come back to me? Make no mistakes, babe, won't you come back to me? Come back, come back, come back, won't you come back to me? Come back, come back, come back, won't you come back to me? Yeah, I'm a mess, I'm not my best, but I won't stop until you're here, till you're here. You're miles away, it's safe to say. It's almost like you've disappeared, disappeared. I'm so sorry that I hurt you so deep. Swear I spent the last few years just trying to change. I'm on my knees and I'm begging you, please. Is there any chance you're thinking about me? If I change my ways, babe, won't you come back to me? Make no mistakes, babe, won't you come back to me? Come back, come back, come back, won't you come back to me? Come back, come back, come back, won't you come back to me? I just wanna let you know that I'll do anything to get you here. Oh, I could never let you go. I'll make it worth your while if you appear. If I change my ways, babe, won't you come back to me? Make no mistakes, babe, won't you come back to me? Come back, come back, come back, won't you come back to me? Come back, come back, come back, won't you come back to me? You made us work, I made us worse. We fell apart 1,000 times, 1,000 times. You moved away, I'm here to stay. I wish I could go back in time, back in time. I'm so sorry that I hurt you so deep. Swear I spent the last few years just trying to change. I'm on my knees and I'm begging you, please. Is there any chance you're thinking about me? If I change
everyone, and welcome to the Healing Element Podcast. I'm your host, Kai Marie. I'm so excited that you are joining us tonight. The title of tonight's program is Healing Our Trauma, What We Can Learn from Broken Stories. My very special guest tonight is Nfr KaRaa, and I'm so excited to have her here today. We're going to be talking about how you can begin to break through trauma cycles in your family. If you're ready to stop the pain and start the healing process, then you do not want to miss any part of this episode. We're going to learn how we can use this broken stories concept, which we'll dive into a little bit deeper, to help us understand and heal from childhood trauma. So, if this is your first time joining the Healing Element podcast, welcome. And you can catch new episodes of The Healing Element every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We go live. And the whole purpose of this podcast is to help you on your journey to break generational cycles. So we want to break those generational cycles of trauma and pain and replace that with healing and just love and spreading that type of healing energy through our family line. So, with that being said, I want to give a very special welcome to Nfr KaRaa. Welcome to the Healing Element podcast.
Oh, thank you. It is such an honor to be here. I am so excited to be able to have the opportunity to share about this important topic during this time.
Yes, and I think when you said during this time, there's so much going on in our world right now, and uh, this having you on is special for so many reasons. But just over the past several months, I think a year at this point, we've had so many conversations about healing, and you have helped me on my journey tremendously. So I want to say thank you for everything that you have poured into my life. I really appreciate everything that you have poured into me, you have shared with me, and it has truly been a blessing. So thank you for that. So this is extra special to have you on tonight.
Well, it's been my total honor and blessing. And I would say, each one teach one, and if you don't share what you have, what is it for?
Yes, yes. And so I'm so thrilled tonight that others will be able to hear the wisdom and knowledge that you have surrounding healing from trauma, especially when we're talking about breaking those generational patterns that we have that we see throughout the line of everyone in their family that has some type of trauma that has been passed down. And so the empowering thing is to know that those who are listening, you have the power to make a change within your family line. So before I keep talking and going any further, would you please introduce yourself? And your full bio can be found in the description box of the video, but can you provide us a little background so that the listeners can know a little bit about who you are?
Well, in a nutshell, I have been a licensed clinical social worker for a little over 40 years. I have spent a lot of that time working in the New York City public school system in the Bronx, working with children, their families, and the community, because I've always realized that you can't just work with the children because they don't live in a vacuum. I
Mm,
also learned early on that you can't just do talk therapy because it's not just about your mind, but it's all aspects of you. So throughout the 40 years, I've had a lot of trainings, not just clinically, experientially, like NLP, hypnotherapy, play therapy, trauma work, but also holistically in terms of using the breath, using sound, using energy work, just using a diversity of things to help people in all different ways, but also being aware that you have to be culturally sensitive because a lot of times the systems are based for just particular subgroups, and that you have to really um, become familiar and aware of the fact that every culture has its own way of relating to things. Every culture also has its own history of trauma and how it's been handed down. So over the years, I've also traveled to different parts of the world because it's one thing hearing about different countries. It's another, being there in person and being able to relate and surround yourself in the cultures so that you are more aware. And then you see people more as people versus, categories.
yes, so true. And what you're saying reminds me of the last episode I had members on from a committee. It's a NADAC committee called Critical Issues in the Black Community. And it was kind of like a forum in which we had substance use counselors on, and they were talking about substance use care and treatment, and how, like, is it available in the Black community, and changes that we need to make as far as changing the systems and structures of making sure that Black communities receive treatment and care that they need, and also start to dismantle systems that are creating the problem. And when we were talking about that, we also had to, because this was, I think it was a special episode that really spoke to people that are substance use counselors or therapists or social workers. And we had to provide everything in the context of understanding the history of the group of people that they're looking to help. And so when you said that it's not just kind of like this broad stroke of beginning to help people, but you have to look and see the specifics of how they've been impacted by community, by society, all of that has to go into play when you're looking to begin the healing process.
Because even when you talk about the Black community, the fact that it's not one size fits everybody, just like in the quote white community, you have all these different cultures. You know, are you from the South or the Caribbean? And if you're from the South, which part of the South? If you're from the Caribbean, which part of the island? Are you first generation here? Are you second generation here? There's so many. And even when you look at quote white communities, are you from Poland? Are you from Britain? Are you, you know, we have gotten so much into colors, and we need to go back to cultures, because the traumas and everything else really has to do with what cultures are you from. And a lot of times we're a blend of, versus, you know, what this country has kind of brought us down to, which is just colors. And we're not colors, we are cultures.
That's so true. So true. And I think that we're going to unpack more of that as we go through our conversation this evening. So first, if people that are listening for the first time, and maybe this whole conversation about trauma, we are hearing a lot about it on mainstream. We're hearing about racial trauma. We're hearing about the trauma that because of the pandemic, and how people are being impacted by that, whether it's health or maybe financially. So we've been hearing a lot about trauma and the importance of mental health. But even though we're hearing it, doesn't mean that we necessarily understand what is trauma. What does that mean? So can you help us understand what is trauma and how it affects our mind, body, and spirit?
That's a great question, because as you said, trauma's become a buzzword and very generic. And the truth is that there is so many types of trauma. As you pointed out, there is group or collective, where there's been like a major event like 9/11, the pandemic, you know, other type of wars that affect a collective of people. You have personal trauma, like you were in a fire, you were sexually assaulted, there was a tragic death in your family. You have traumas that have been handed down, which is one of the things we're going to focus on, that have happened in prior. Sometimes it's the collective, like they talk about post-traumatic slave trauma. However, the truth of it is that, yes, that was a very turbulent times, but that we've had other traumas since then. We've had the Reconstruction, we've had Jim Crow, the no Jim Crow, we've had the civil rights, we've had, 9/11, we've had the current, and it's still going on. Racism has not died. So it's a continuum of, and also a lot of times in the mental health field, sometimes people think they can just talk it away. Whereas there are mental, emotional components, there's also physiology. Because if you notice, like if you were physically abused growing up, you may be easily startled where somebody comes in the room and you'll jump because it's still in your body to brace yourself. I was on a broadcast the other day, and a woman there was sharing how she had been sexually assaulted by relatives. And when she got married, that the reflexes, when her partner came to her, she would start beating them and trying to push them away.
Wow.
Not realizing that this was a reflex from when she had been sexually assaulted. Her body still remembered this is not safe, even though it was now in a safe. So that the healing has to be on all types of level, mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And also the fact that it's not one size fits all. So when they say trauma, it's like when we say black and white. It's like, okay, which trauma? And also the fact you could have multiple. You have the intergenerational. You can
Mm-hmm.
also have things that happen within your cultural collective, within
Mm-hmm.
just your family,
Mm-hmm.
within your generation, within yourself personally.
Mm-hmm.
So even when we use the word trauma, just like we use the word black or white or something, it's like, okay, so when you're talking with which aspect are you talking about, or which collective? And to have them, okay, what thoughts come to your mind? Where do you feel it in your body? What does it feel like? What do the whole experience? And I think that's been part of the challenge, is that we give topical lip service to it. But as you said, everybody acts like they know what it is, but they don't really.
Mm-hmm.
Just become, another slogan like a Mac attack. Yeah, I got trauma.
Right.
It's like,
Very
nice to
true.
meet you. It's like, me too. Like, what do you have?
Mm-hmm. It's so true. And so what you were saying, and how it can impact our body with that response and not even realizing it. How would that impact maybe the spirit of a person? That's something we also really don't talk too much about when we're having the conversation about trauma, and speaking more so in mainstream. Again, it's, in my opinion, very surface level. There's not like a deeper dive into the conversation. So how would trauma impact one's spirit?
I think part of it in looking at it is that in our society, we also tend to combine religion with spirit. Different religions have political aspects, and depending on the person, you can be within how you connect to a higher power,
Mm-hmm.
which you can relate to in different ways. There's different names, there's different types of relationships. And sometimes in this country, spiritual trauma is that the way that you relate has been villainized.
Hmm.
During 9/11, if you were a Muslim, it wasn't safe.
Mm-hmm.
Even now, um, there's a whole battle going on with certain aspects of Christianity
Mm-hmm.
and women's rights.
Mm-hmm.
And some people get caught in the middle and are traumatized of,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I believe this as a woman, but I also believe this so spiritual is how to relate to those aspects that aren't so concrete and that have been politicized, and you get caught in the middle. So in terms of spiritual trauma, it would be aspects like that.
Like that. Yeah, and you're right. We are starting to see that. I think was it Texas or Alabama that passed that?
Texas,
Texas,
and others are
before
getting
July.
ready for it.
Yes. And we do have a question for you. Do you think the public death of George Floyd triggered a population trauma reaction among Black people in the US?
I think it was one of many, because unfortunately George Floyd wasn't the first.
Mm-hmm.
I think that as modern technology has become more and more sophisticated, you have more and more witnesses to particular traumas. But the trauma of George Floyd was fortunately had been recorded and spread so much that
Mm-hmm.
the whole world saw it, not just like his neighborhood or the state.
Mm-hmm.
Um, However, there have been responses throughout history. I mean, let's not forget, during civil rights, we had, we still see the murder of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, even the president of the United States, John F. Kennedy, and his brother.
Right.
When Malcolm X and when Martin Luther King were murdered, everybody was out in the streets all over the country.
Mm-hmm.
They even had, one of the singers, St. James Brown, who was trying to calm down the crowd around where he was. Um, there are so many others that had been that were not even acknowledged. When they had Emmett Till, and he was a child, down south. That's what I'm saying. George Floyd, not to minimize, it's just
Mm-hmm.
that for this generation, that's the one that's been most. But for us, as they call us OGs or whatever they call us these days, you know, there's been traumas going on even prior to my generation, you know, and before, back during enslavement. You know, during Jim Crow, they were hanging you like strange fruit, as Billie Holiday said, all over the place. I know one of my mother-in-law used to talk about how even as a little girl, how they were hosed down, and how one time on the way to school, she actually saw one of her uncles who had just come back from the war. He was a veteran, but he had the audacity abroad to have married a white woman. Brought her back with him, and that was a no-no back in those days. And she's on her way to school, and he's hanging from a tree dead.
Oh, my God.
So when we talk about traumas, you know, and the fact that that was commonplace doing that, because even with Billie Holiday, it was so traumatic for her to sing that song. And because it was such a threatening song, that she was actually hounded until they got her hooked on drugs around medicating herself around the pain of it, but also trying to shut her up and eventually kill her because she was singing too much truth. So part of the challenge is that in our education system throughout this country, I don't care if it's public school, charter school, whatever school, which is why they have this whole thing now about telling our full story. That since our full story is not told, most of these younger generations do not know all of that. So when George Floyd came, it was like this was a new thing. Versus this is a continuum, because they watered down teaching about the civil rights. They don't tell you the whole thing about, and also they make it seem like all of this only happened down south. I was born and raised in New York City. And I can tell you, growing up, when they were busing us to integrate schools up here, I lived like 20 minutes north of New York City. I also for a while lived in North New Jersey. Both places, from elementary up until high school, our community was separated into a grid, and different sections were bused to different schools to integrate it. And even though we didn't have people spitting on us and telling us go home and stuff, in some ways it was more intense, because at least down south, not that that was any picnic, was validated. Up north, it was like, oh, it's not happening up here. But the mental anguish that we were put through and made to feel less than, and the way we were talked to and everything else. I mean, we could tell you horror stories that have never, ever been talked about. You know, it was like everything was just hunky dory up here, especially by New York, because, you know, we're a international progressive. And I mean, working in the school system, after being bused to integrate and then go to the New York City school system and it's segregated, they don't call it that. But when all you've got is Blacks and Latinos, you know, where's white folks? I mean, I worked in a lot of schools over those times, and I mean, I could lift on one hand how many had integrated, and that meant you had 2 or 3 white students in it.
Wow. And that's sending a message to the students, because you're seeing the difference, that you're being treated differently. You're seeing your school looks different. You're seeing your access to resources looks different. So that right there is telling a student their value and how they're valued by the society around them.
Oh, yeah, because it definitely wasn't separate but equal. In the same district, because one time I still never did understand. I mean, I looked more conventional at that time, but I was sent to a predominantly white school that had about a handful of neighborhood kids from a project that was there. The difference in their resources in the northern part of the Bronx to in the South Bronx, where I was at the same year, was phenomenal. In the South Bronx, their auditorium curtains was in shreds, being hung up by safety pins, and the peel is painting off the walls. And the art teacher's crayons was whatever she brought from home. Up in the North Bronx, where it's more Irish and Italian, they had just had a new paint job. They had new auditorium curtains, even though there was nothing wrong with the other ones. They just didn't match correctly. The superintendent at the time was moonlighting for Apple computers. So they had computers because it was just coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Since they were going to throw out the auditorium curtains because it didn't match, I was going to bring it down to the South Bronx because they didn't care what color it was. At least it was. And oh no, you can't do that. He said,
Wow.
that's, like, that's stealing. I was like, I'm not bringing it home. I'm bringing
Right.
it to the other. No. And threatened to fire me if I were to do that. And they said, well, that principal just has to manage her money better. And I was like, I don't think that she's getting the same budget as the other one.
Exactly.
It really doesn't seem that way to me.
Mm-hmm.
I always tell people it was a good thing that New York City and the Bronx had a lot of schools, because I tended to talk up a lot, because I told them, as a social worker, my job is to advocate, because our children are going through enough trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And for doing that, there were a lot of times I had to shift schools, because some principals were on board, and if they were gotten rid of over time. And, when it came to me, some principals were, like, I'm supposed to kiss up or something. So it was time to go. But the North, I just say that to say that the mind games that continue to be played up North made an event like George Floyd that happened there, and then Eric Garner that happened up here in Staten Island.
Right.
And people don't talk about the fact that the person who did that video, as much as the community was in support, first they incarcerated him and his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And then when there was a GoFundMe to get him out and his wife out, they found some other reason to incarcerate him again. And that time they didn't, you can only get but so much money at one time. So he was in there and definitely was not treated very well for his role in bringing that to the public.
Right.
One of my former students that they stopped talking about for some reason, Ramarley Graham, had been a former student of mine. He was selling pot to, try to make some extra money for his family, and doing sweeps in our community. And the police came to apprehend him off the corner. And we're talking a high school student. So, of course, he didn't want to go to jail. So Mr. Macho ran home, and everybody knew that, you have a black garbage bag underneath your shirt to have your product, your marijuana. No, they're going to say, oh, they thought it was a gun. I don't even sell it now. I know that's where they keep it. They follow him to his house, break in, no warrant, nothing. The poor child is on his knees trying to flush down his product so he won't go to jail. His grandmother, who's only 5 feet tall and skinny as all get up, and his little brother are there. The police came crashing in because I went to visit the home afterward to calm down the parents. He's on his knees flushing down his product, and they shoot him in the chest dead in front of. There are other students, I could go on for days. There were so many others, and this is up here in the Bronx, and a gamut of types of families. Some of them are hardworking middle class. Even with Abdou Diallo, he was up the street from a school I was at that time. If you saw how small that entranceway was that they murdered him in, how you could confuse and think he was, because I went there. And this was somebody that was really beloved by the community because he helped all the ladies with their packages and always had extra little goodies for the kids and stuff. It traumatized them. And then the aftermath for that they try to mitigate on the news.
Right.
So when it comes to traumas, when it comes to Eric Garner, and I see here when it talks about Sean Bell, absolutely. That was another. But again, it goes back to, there's a book that's called My Grandmother's Hands.
Oh, yes.
And in this book, it was very helpful because it really talks about the visceral physical trauma that people of color go through, white folks go through, and the police go through. And when you think about, like when I was talking about how we used to be hung during Jim Crow and things, when you look at pictures, people would act like it was a picnic and they would bring their children to this. So they're traumatized in another way in terms of, you know, you got to be afraid of Black people, you know, you got to hang them and stuff because they're violent. So those traumatized now become police officers.
Mm-hmm.
They're still having this visceral reaction of, you know, fear and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it's never been addressed. You're
Right.
going to have people that are, you know, because I remember one of my most favorite speeches from Obama, you know, his last term. So that way
Mm-hmm.
it's not like he had to worry about votes anymore.
Mm-hmm.
He talked about being a Black man in America. And he said, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
before I was president, yeah, I'm a tall Black man. I've gone through, as I'm walking through the street, people locking their car doors, women holding their purses in the elevator, afraid I'm going to mug them and things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have myself experienced that.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that, yes, this trauma that people that are of different European descents have gone through in terms of how to perceive us.
Mm-hmm.
You now have them as a police officer. You can see the fear in them all the time. So they're shooting like, yeah, out of their own fear, their own trauma that's been handed down, and then sometimes, you know, the way they've been socialized is not addressed in their training. So I'm hoping that now that they're talking about we need to do some sensitization, that they realize it's not just a feel-good kumbaya 6-week training, that there's got
Right.
to be an acknowledgement about the impact physically as well as emotionally and spiritually this trauma has.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we want to hear like Sidney Poitier, who, you know, guess who's coming to dinner. That'd be nice if, you know, even some of your best friends are people of color.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't give you a free pass. You know?
Right. It's so true. And I think what you're bringing up and sharing these stories is this is one thing that we used to do as a community is share stories. And I would say because of the trauma and because everyone is dealing with so much, we kind of have stopped sharing stories. And a lot of us have kind of just kept how we're feeling and what we're dealing with within ourselves. But as we all know, it's going to come out some kind of way, whether it comes out with different type of chronic conditions, depression, anxiety, somehow it's going to come out. So hopefully those that are watching our conversation tonight will help you begin to see the importance of sharing and telling your story and telling the experiences that you have gone through. And another reason why I want to mention this, especially about telling our historical stories, is because so I'm on TikTok, Lord help us, and there's a lot of trends on TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one trend in particular in which I don't know this, I do not know the name of the singer, but there's a singer who sampled that song Strange Fruit. And it's now a trend, right? But no one knows the story of
Billie
that
Holiday.
song. And so it just has become this dance trend.
Mm-hmm.
And when there is a part where you can kind of hear the person saying it, like blood on the leaves. And you have people that are doing a dance to this.
Yes.
And so I looked in the comments, and
Mm-hmm.
so some folks have responded to this video and have said, wait a second, do you understand what this song, even though this is a sample, they took whatever artist took a snippet of this, do you understand what this song is about?
The seriousness behind it.
Yes. And the thing that was so disturbing is that when many content creators have come out and said, listen, this is what the story is about, so many people are responding as, come on, it's just a song.
But
why
see,
are you looking into it that deep?
But you see, that's also part of the way that it's important for our history not to be so marginalized.
Yeah.
Because since these younger generations have no idea about the significance of it, as I shared about my mother-in-law, to see her own uncle, who was a war veteran, hanging from the tree like one of these strange fruits.
Mm-hmm.
Is that really just a song for her?
Mm-hmm.
On 125th Street, before it was gentrified, they used to have all these different vendors, and some of them sold books about our history. One had graphic pictures about lynching. and actually had a symbol of like a dummy hanging to get people's attention around the fact that it's just a song when you can normalize it because you don't know your history.
Right.
You don't know that pain. And a lot of those very people, when we talk about broken stories, because from generation to generation, a lot of times from the trauma, it's not discussed, but it's still there, which is why a lot of people self-medicate. They're self-medicating for a pain they're not even in touch with because it's never discussed. They're self-medicating from the messages of us being less than, that's not being acknowledged and normalized. Because even when we were talking about it, I was talking to another social worker earlier, and they brought to my attention, which again was normalized, that we no longer are connected to our extended family. Back in the day, you had grandma and grandpa and great aunts and everybody, and you would hear the family stories. You would share. They would teach you things like, I remember my grandmother used to show me how to make mint tea from actual mint. I never did figure out how she could keep it green naturally because mine always turned brown, but she had done, But these days, there's so much focus on the nuclear family.
Right.
Half the time you don't even live near grandma and grandpa.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like all we need is ourselves. So you're not hearing the stories. You're not sharing the stories. I know nieces and nephews in my family, I get very upset because they know next to nothing. I thought I don't know but so much because a lot of times they were like, well, don't talk about the bad stuff. And at this
Right.
point, trying to piece it together and seeing how much a lot of these things affected me and my other family members, and then trying to find who's left as, at this stage of life, there's not a whole lot older than me, but what few there are to see, where did this come from and how many ahas you have from that? Because
Right.
even when we talked about the healing and broken stories, a lot of times we hear derogatory, oh, so-and-so was a crackhead or an alcoholic. But we don't talk about, when he came back from fighting from Afghanistan, he was so traumatized, he started drinking. But, he was like the head of football in class. He was a top student. He was really good in math, or he was really handy, the whole story.
Right.
Because when it comes to the broken stories, the fact that we know fragments, and it's usually the fragments of shame, and weakness. And then we make it a joke. Oh, yeah, he always had alcohol on his breath. Well, what was his story? What was he before that? What happened to him? Because a lot of times we focus on, what they do versus what happened to them that became part of it.
Yes, so true. And that we can jump right into that concept of, and I don't know if anyone who is listening right now, if you've heard of this concept called broken stories. If yes, drop in the comment box. And if you haven't, also, we would like to know just kind of if that's something that folks are familiar with. And also if you're finding that this episode, if this podcast is really helping you on your journey, please share this episode and also subscribe to the Healing Element podcast so that way we can continue to create content that can help people that are on their journey of healing and creating cycles of healing in their family. So with that being said, let's jump right into this concept of broken stories. What is this concept, and kind of what does it mean?
The broken stories was originally brought to my attention from a training that I took with this awesome group called Ngolo and Aya. I think I sent you the links for their
Yes,
website.
and I'll put it right in the chat box.
They have Zoom collectives where we talk about different type of conscious things on the first and third Saturdays at 1:30, and then on the first and third Mondays at 7. But the broken stories was a special workshop that they also give at times where it talks about that, how we're so used to talking about people from their weaknesses, which is what breaks us, and is also breaking the sense of strength and pride and greatness within our family. And to re-script that and to ask those questions, what happened that? And each of us during that training had to write our own broken story from first how we were told, and then in a sense of empowerment. And I must say, in that process, the healing that you get, because you're not always even in touch with the sense of shame you have of, oh, yeah, so-and-so drank too much or so-and-so is a pedophile. But when you begin to look at, and because you had to go and ask your aunts, uncles, because, anybody else, what do you know about so-and-so? Oh, yeah, he actually had a Purple Heart from the Korean War, and when he came back, he was starting his own business, and the Ku Klux Klan came and burned him down 3 times. And after a while, and when you find out the full story, it's like, wow, so we were survivors. We were, this, so you have a fuller, and to learn to do that, because we have so much around the blame game. How many people, yeah, my mother, she's, I remember it was interesting. They had done a special on Richard Pryor, and they were focusing on the fact that, yes, his mother was a prostitute and his father was a drug dealer or a pimp or something, and the amount of anger and everything that he, and how he channeled it, but that he also self-medicated, which led to a lot of his physical deteriorations because that pain, that trauma, but also it never got back to what his mother and father were. Before she was a prostitute, she was somebody's daughter. How did she end up in that? What was her fuller story? What was the fuller story of her family? What was the fuller story of his father's family? Because when we don't pull the lens back, we can get stuck in that pain and internalize it. And then what does that mean about me? If that's who I'm from, what does that mean? Who does that make me? What does that make me? And then the anger, because we're just in this moment. But when you broaden it and you look at the fuller story and to see, oh, is that the way that we survived during that time? Because it's the only way we could make money to take care of. Was that doing, which part of history? Was that doing Jim Crow? Was that doing Reconstruction? And to see, okay, is this a trauma that was just within my family? Or was this the way the communities as a whole had to survive at that time? What was going on politically at that time? What was going on in the world at that time? Because if you notice, a lot of times people also have a way of competing with who was more traumatized. Oh, well, we had the Holocaust. Well, we had slavery. Well, we had this, we had that. They're all traumatic in different ways. And rather than everybody trying to outdo each other, they were all bad. And they affected us in different ways. And part of it is to look at it in that perspective. It's just like as we talk about 9/11, depending on how close you were to 9/11, and if you lost somebody in 9/11, everybody was traumatized or not traumatized, depending on. Part of it is your location. Part of it is your personality. Part of it, there's so many different aspects. But if you're going to try to compete with, well, I was more traumatized in 9/11 than you were, because versus this was a collective trauma and it was a personal trauma. And how do we work together to help heal it? This whole divide and conquer is what keeps everybody broken.
Yes.
The healing is when we collectively find ways to work together and to be able to own our parts, because, people lately has been showing how, you have the white race in terms of the racism, what that does, which is different to individual people. I know people from, different European backgrounds who are very mortified and embarrassed when they find out that their forefathers were enslavers, or part of the KKK and what have you. And, and to take the onus of it, it's like I didn't do that, and I don't sign to it. Just the same way if somebody that's Caucasian may be mugged by somebody of color who's a, crack addict or something, and they just say, well, all black people are on crack and all black people are, and then they become a police officer, and in their mind, everybody. So when you stereotype and you get caught in your broken stories of any type, it ends up breaking up the society, the community as a whole.
So true.
Which is why it needs to be healed and addressed in all these different aspects. You can't just talk it away. You can't just anything away. It's a systemic that you have to use all different type of modalities and aspects. So, even in going for therapy, to find someone who is culturally sensitive and aware, and it's not based on just what you look like, because we know a lot of people look like folks, but they're not connected. So
that's very true.
exactly. What are their trainings? Are they just going to talk to you, or do they know various modalities in trauma work to be able to help on all these different, reading books like My Grandmother's Hands. There was also another one that Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce Perry wrote on What Happened to You that also talks about various aspects of trauma. So even within ourselves, to read things like that helps, you to have a sense of not feeling isolated, like only you have gone through all of this. Right. We spend so much time also watching things on TV that are traumatizing, and we voluntarily watch it and aren't aware of how even basic media, when you look at commercials, when you look at all type of things, there's so many subliminal cues that are put into commercials in particular, but even the way the news and everything else are presented to instill fear at times, to normalize certain things, and if you're not aware of it, you just kind of blindly follow along. Currently right now we have this whole thing of pro-vax, anti-vax versus the fact that, okay, there is not one size fits all. Not everybody who's not comfortable being vaccinated have the same beliefs. You have a full spectrum. Some have different conspiracies. Some have medical concerns. Some just want to ask some basic questions, but it's all. Then you have all those who have been vaccinated. Some are very gung-ho. Some are just doing it because they just don't want to be harassed, but are concerned. You have a full spectrum. But because if you have two enemy camps, then you don't have any accountability, because you don't have the middle ground where people are coming together and sharing and being able to ask intelligent questions. Like I hear you saying these slogans, follow the science, do this, do that. What does that mean? Can you break it down for me? Rather than insulting people's intelligence with, well, I'm going to give you $100 if you do it, or I'm going to give you some free fast food if you do it, or I'm going to, I'm going to let you go to this vaccine, this vax spreader thing or something. It's like, why can't we be in the middle as a collective and can ask intelligent questions?
Yes, and have that conversation.
Exactly. But it's by design, because this country has always done that. You have people from the South versus people from the Caribbean, and then the different Caribbean islands against each other, the different Southern states against each other. You have men versus women. You have light-skinned people versus dark-skinned people, the elderly versus the young people, where the power is when there's a balance and we all can come together and communicate. That's where the healing is. That's where the stories are able to be pulled together, because we all have different pieces of the puzzle.
Right.
So instead of being broken stories and broken pieces, healing is in pulling out the lens, looking at all the different angles, not just, tunnel vision, and to see, where do we overlap? Where do we have commonality that we can start from and learn from each other, grow from each other? And that's how we take our power back, versus being manipulated by others in whatever, however way. Because I'm not, whatever's conspiracy or not conspiracy, I couldn't tell you for sure, because there's so much confusion going on.
There's so much going on.
Politics in general, I say it's politics. It's like, if you're not having these conversations and also doing our own healing individually as well as a community. Because as you said, when you have like a George Floyd or Eric Garner or whatever, collectively as a community, there needs to be healing around that trauma.
Right.
For that area, and then also as a country. not just seeing it and having it reigniting, the anger, the fear and everything, but then where do you put that? What do you do with that? They talk about how we need mental health. Yeah, we do need mental health, but what type of mental health are you providing, and how culturally sensitive? There was a group of us lately that saw that, yes, it is very focused on a particular cultural perspective. It doesn't fit most people.
Right.
And if that type of structure isn't addressed and adjusted after all these years to make it be more in sync with what we're seeing, and the broken stories is an aspect of that technique in terms of how we connect ourselves to.
Right. So true. And when you're talking about kind of the this versus that and the either or, that's kind of like the paradigm that we're in right now, where there isn't a middle ground of let's have a conversation. It's like, oh, you're on that side. And it's like, well, wait a second. There may be some truth coming from both sides of whatever issue, right? Because the truth, as there is that saying, the truth is always somewhere in the middle, and we completely have moved past that. But just when we think of in our own bodies, what if we had our organs or stuff were competing with other organs in our body, or there's parts of one arm was competing with the other arm? We would not function properly. And so if you're in a society where there's this constant competing and whose trauma is worse than the other, or you have to pick a side, and there's no need, the need isn't seen, that it's time that in order for us to move forward, we have to have some type of common ground, or at least have a conversation. But if everyone's kind of like, no, I'm going to do my own thing, that body cannot function properly. And it's going to be very toxic. It's going to lead to a very toxic environment. So I think this concept that you have shared with us tonight about the broken stories is beginning to, hopefully everyone listening can say, okay, wait a second, let me take a step back. Let me begin to look at the whole picture instead of just this little part of the picture that I just want to focus in on because maybe it makes me feel better. Maybe, for whatever reason, it feels good just to focus on this one particular part of the story. But in order to really understand, you have to look at everything in its entirety. And it's just like a movie. If you go watch a movie and you watch a clip, you're not going to the clip may not make sense. You may not really be able to understand everything because you have not watched the full film. So hopefully with the conversation tonight, people that are listening will be able to understand the importance. I love this concept of beginning to look at everything and the people if you have been hurt by someone in your family, this is not negating what you've gone through, but it is kind of looking at say, okay, that person did this to me. What caused that to happen?
Right. Exactly. Because the other thing is is that people hold on to it, and it's like, how is that serving you? You begin to, well, I'm a this victim, I'm a that victim. First of all, instead of I'm a so-and-so victim, I'm a so-and-so survivor. And I come from a family of survivors. Because even when you're talking about the body, again, there is a lot of disharmony between the foods that we eat that are not real foods, not even knowing how to breathe. Most people don't even realize they're not breathing half the time, and that just taking a full breath from your diaphragm, not up here, but through your diaphragm, a lot of times can quiet and ground you in a way that nothing else. Being out in nature, not the city blacktop ones, but with actual earth, actual trees, feeling the breeze, feeling the warmth of your sun. They'll tell you one of the best ways to strengthen your own immune system, because we all actually have one, is especially during the summer and thing, is to be out in the sun to strengthen your vitamin D, which helps to, strengthen your immune system, to have real food, produce, like actually fresh fruits and vegetables, something that's not coming out of a box, something that you don't have to read, this whole list of ingredients that you don't recognize. Because if you don't recognize, I'm amazed how many people when I talk to, and I say, well, what's in that you're eating? Well, I don't know. It says all natural. All natural what? Dog crap is natural, but I wouldn't eat that. Like what's natural in it? I said, did you ever read the ingredients? No. I mean, I'm amazed how many people do not read the ingredients of the food they put in their body. And it's like, if you don't recognize what's in the ingredients, or if it's so small you can't read it, neither can your body. You might want to not do that. We've been trained, especially in our communities, that if it's good for you, it must taste nasty, and it's not really our type of food. Meanwhile, if we knew our true history and knew that back in the ancestral days, you pick things fresh off the tree, off the plant, off the whatever, that was very much our food. But again, from the traumas that we've went through, that we're not taught of all that happened in coming here, because that's, for some reason, that's being extra. Knowing that and seeing, oh, that's how I came to think this is a delicacy. This is how I came to think that's what, this is why I now think, to be true to my community, I can't be accelerating academically. I can't, be speaking a certain way. I can't be eating a certain way. I can't be managing my finances. I shouldn't even know that this is whole self-talk that come from those broken stories. Because we're like, just as you said with about strange fruit. Yeah, it's only a song when you don't know the true history of the period that was written in, why it was written, what inspired it. But when it's taken out of context and normalized, then it's just a song. If they made a song about the Holocaust, would that be just a song? If we were just boogieing on down talking about the Holocaust,
right,
and going into them ovens and the whole thing, would that be okay? No. But again, if that's why it's so important for us to know our history, and that's why it makes me question, why is there such a pushback and making it racist to want to tell our whole story, the whole story of this country from everybody involved, versus the way that it's been, I don't even know the word, but when I look at what our kids are taught and what's not only what's left out, but the way it's mistaught. One time I was on a cultural diversity planning thing in the Bronx, and so they had a map of the world, and they showed Italy with the Italian outfit and food that's indigenous from there. They did that for Britain, they did that for France, Spain, and everything. My first concern was that they showed Africa as a country. Last I heard, Africa is it's the largest continent, and it has many countries. It was a solid for Africa, for the country of Africa. They had a gorilla eating a banana. And I'm looking at this, and this is in the South Bronx, back in the early 2000s. So we're not even talking like last century. And there was a few other people, of color. And they were and so I raised my hand. I said, I'm confused. And they was like, what's wrong? Because they thought it was terrific. I said, well, first of all, when did Africa become a country? And how is it everybody else has a person in an outfit and a food of their choice and the flower of their country? How did Africa get consolidated to one? And how do we get to be a gorilla eating a banana? And they were like what was wrong with that? And I'm looking at the other people of color like, you're good with that? So we had a little brief conversation about my upset. Next thing I knew, when they had the follow-up meeting, I was not invited. And I'm looking at this like, okay, so this isn't traumatic to our children, which is why they're always trying to have other people's hair in their head, because their hair is, ugly, You know, they don't want to be too black. They don't want to have
Right.
too, you know, and I'm trying to tell them it's little things like this that give subliminal cues. Because when I would go to Africa, I went to Egypt and learned about our history there, to Ethiopia, to South, and any place I went, I would take pictures so I could bring it back and show our children. This is what it really looks like there. These are the things that came, you know, that are part of our history. We have languages. We're not running around eating each other like cannibals, and you know, and they'd be like, really? And you could see how much they, you know, they just hungered to have us. Like we did what? I even had some of my acting out kids when I told them, look, we were the original doctors with Imhotep and everybody else, and we were the original this and that. And they were like, really? Well, then I should be acting like a fool in school then, huh? I come from royalty. I come from important people. I said, that's right. And they started telling everybody else, you know what I found out? So we gotta act better, because we didn't just come from, we came from greatness. So that's why it's important for us to continue to fight for a more inclusive and accurate curriculum, not what's being shown there. But outside of that, for us as in our generations to take the time to learn, so we'll know why Strange Fruit isn't just a song, amongst other things. Because it's not just for our children to learn. We have to learn, because a lot of what they learn is from watching us.
Exactly.
So we have to be educated as well. And this is a source, you know, but also in all the communities that we live in, to see, you know, who's teaching more, who's more culturally relevant about our own histories. Years ago, we used to have independent schools that taught, you know, different African languages. So our children learned that we actually had languages. We weren't just grunting around like little animals going something. That what we, you know, what was not being taught in the general public, you know, but politically it started being under, you know, usurped by finances and other things. But we need to regain that, so that things like concepts like broken stories don't get lost.
Right. That's so true. That's so true. And I know we're winding down with time, but I just wanted to mention what you were talking about, kind of how Africa is framed as a country. I was doing research for a presentation. It's directly tied to this. I was doing research for a presentation. I was looking up ancient healing modalities. So, of course, there's a lot of information about Ayurveda. I found plenty of information about that, plenty of information about traditional Chinese medicine. And I was looking at this timeline that was created by a person that does a lot of work with meditation. He's very mainstream. He does a lot of work about ancient medicine and all that. And his timeline only had India and China. That was it. So I'm like, you know, as far as my background, I took Kemetic yoga. So I know that, you know, even if we're looking at Kemet or Egypt, I know that there was a medical institution that was there. And I'm sure that wasn't the only place on the continent, but just my connection immediately when I saw that, I was like, wow, so we're just going to totally remove a whole continent from the conversation when we're looking about ancient medicine.
Oh, yeah, everything started in India and Asia. But I've learned from doing similar trainings, whenever they start talking about, well, the ancient origins, ancient is code for Africa. Because anything I do and I ask, well, where did they get it from? Oh, it's handed down from word of mouth. Word of mouth is from Africa. And then ancient is code for Africa. Actually, when they give credit to aliens is code for Africa. Because when I went to, because I always tell people, I went to Egypt and discovered Kemet, and how on the walls you can see the first medical tools that predate from their own carbon dating. You can see the different yoga poses. You can see how it's connected to Kupagana and Gumi, which is a kicking, punching form that originated in Africa, and a lot of those others, you can see similar, because I had taken Kupagana with Mfudisi years ago. And when I take other forms, it's a variation of that came after it. But even in timelines, they try to show that the cuneiforms from Mesopotamia and the Medu Neter, which they call hieroglyphics from Egypt, which was Kemet, were the same time, whereas from their own carbon dating, the Medu Neter very much predates it, and is also a much more complex system. But as Fidesi would always say, he who controls the situation defines it. And until we retrieve our stories and take control back of our narrative, we're going to have things like it's just a song.
Right.
Or being victimized. It's like, as long as we're doing it from a sense of weakness and disempowerment, versus where was the strength in this? Broken Stories is about identifying the strength in, the power in it, the healing in it. So that way you're growing forward, healing the next generations, instead of handing down a sense of shame and brokenness.
So true. So powerful. You guys, I mean, this conversation tonight was so powerful, and I think so needed, especially the time that we're in right now. So I hope everyone is listening. Please make sure you give this video a thumbs up. Please also share and subscribe to the podcast, so that way we can continue to spread the message of healing and transformation. Nfr KaRaa, I want to thank you so much for coming on this platform. It's such an honor to host you. And I'm sure that this concept of broken stories, I know that this has really resonated with people, and I'm sure that this is something that they would like to learn more about. So if that is the case, please make sure you check out right in the comment section. I put the information so that way you can go to the website directly to learn more about this concept. So in closing, is there anything that you would like to share with our listeners tonight?
Well, I want to thank you to have the opportunity to share. I hope this is the beginning of larger conversations. I invite everyone to start having these conversations with your elders while they're still there, to find out what is our story, what is the good, bad, and ugly, so that you have it. Because a lot of times by the time we think about it, it's too late. Everybody's gone. So I invite you all to have those stories, because they're very healing and very empowering. And it also helps to pull together families a lot of times that, have had different fragments because of how they keep these secrets. If there's any ways that I can be of more support in terms of, other questions over time, or, other groups that may, want more information or something, to please feel free to reach out, because this is a very important topic that we need in the healing of our communities.
So true. And your contact information, I believe your email address is in the description box. So if people do want to reach out to learn more, I encourage you to do that. Now is the time to do it for yourselves and for our communities. So with that being said, thank you all so much for listening and joining us tonight. And please make sure you join me next Tuesday for another episode. If you want to learn more about me and my services, please visit my website, KaiMarie.com. And please also visit me on Instagram at KaiMarie_LLC. I hope you all have a wonderful night, and I will see you next Tuesday.
Come to this, that we would say goodbye.